Caddis Maximus here, this time with a shorter review of the Harbor Freight Icon long handle reversible ratcheting box wrench set. These are indeed long handle, and these happen to be the torque point. They also have ones that are in standard point. These are pretty expensive for the metric set. Normal price $150 on the shelf, but even items like this, if somebody damages the packages and returns them, these can actually end up on the discount shelf. A lot of times it's not much off, but it can be 15 or 20 or even 25% off in the case where I picked these up. So I paid around 120 bucks. So I said, why not? They do help fill out a set, and it is kind of interesting that Harbor Freight chose both stubbies, which I reviewed earlier, these here, and then they have long handle, but they didn't have standard handle. And so part of the impetus for me picking these up is truly set building, and I do appreciate how they are a nice long length. What I have here is my Craftsman ratcheting box wrench set. We have the Icon long handle, and then we have the ratcheting stubby, and we can see that with these three sizes it's actually perfect. Short, medium, and long. And so that was really a big deal. If you're a set builder, then having something like this is great, because that way you know that you have three different length wrenches and gives you more versatility. The set is a 10 through 19 millimeter, and for the price, I do understand the criticism. At a minimum, I think they should have been a 12-piece set, 8 through 19 millimeter. They do sell some additional sizes, which would be 20 through 24 millimeter as a separate set. I think that's around 100 bucks. And it seems those extension ratcheting sets, at least, not all stores are stocking those. Are kind of a special order item. Let me clean some of this up here. I'll quickly point out a couple of things I've seen on these icons here. Is that you can see that there's a gap, and then there's like a little shiny piece of metal. That piece of metal is actually the ratcheting pawl. It is a single sliding pawl design, and I can understand that specific design and the compact nature of a ratcheting box wrench. It gives you a much larger, wider pawl, maximizing surface area and engagement, trying to give these a halfway amount of strength. And they're not warning you against breaking bolts, but generally speaking, you don't want to break really seized bolts with a ratcheting box wrench. You use a breaker bar. The point I was making is there is a little bit of a gap in there. You can see how this is moving around, and so you want to periodically oil it, because that's going to allow a little bit more grit to get in there. Although this isn't the same size with these old Craftsman USAs, they had a really tight finish, and so that just helps prevent the grit, as much grit, from being able to get into the mechanism. I kind of like the older switches, or at least the switches on these Craftsmans, although the Icon ones are pretty nice. They are flush. They're really easy to hit. I think they may be a little bit too easy to hit, and maybe have just a bit of extra overhang, and I just worry about durability, because people tend to be really harsh on box wrenches. And the Craftsman one is pretty small, but I think it's just about right. The other thing I was going to mention is it looks more like a straight box wrench that was just bent. The reason I say that is because if we look at this Craftsman and the way it's really thick, this was designed to be a bent wrench from the beginning, versus one that seems like it was a modified straight wrench. Just because we can see that it quite isn't the same bulk of material at the head on this Icon as there is on this old Craftsman. Otherwise, they sound pretty good. They seem, pretty decent. These are Harbor Freight's big push here. So I got a couple different fasteners, and let's talk about these open end, or these torque point grips. So the idea of this is when you get it on the fastener, it's supposed to help prevent rounding, because it helps offset the pressure point further in on the bolt. And the reality is I think it helps a little bit with torque, but the difference between breaking this bolt, or a 19 millimeter, with a straight wrench, especially one like this Craftsman, which has a pretty nice fit, but we can see it does hit right on the corners, and part of the idea is that the corner starts to mush away, and then the pressure point moves inward, but there isn't a supporting material. So when you're using a wrench like this, that helps kind of build up a little wedge of material and gives a little bit more grab. But the torque difference isn't that much, and because they cut these reliefs, it really has like a lot of play on that, and so you got to kind of be careful, make sure you're not partially on the bolt, but they do have a mitigation for that. Part of that mitigation is A big portion of the reason that you do round out bolts is because you're trying to torque it, but you're actually, twisting it back and forth, and you end up halfway on the fastener, or most of the way off of the fastener, and then this part of the box wrench starts to collapse a little bit, and then it rounds out, or starts rounding out your fastener. And so what I liked, and I'll flip this bolt over, is they have this little undercut on the front. And so the idea is if you have tension on it, and you can hear it, it kind of catches the corner of the fastener. And so when you are pulling and torquing on it, it actually works pretty well at preventing it from wanting to slip off. If we use this fastener, which it's easier to see, but when we put the fastener in there, we can see that it notches in there. And I think that's kind of an interesting idea, because when you're torquing on it like this, it actually wants to stay on there. Now, as soon as that little lip wears off, you lose that effect, and it probably wouldn't take too long, but I do kind of like that. That's an interesting idea, and I think it is effective. It's just the kind of thing where if I go back to these forged washer head bolts or forged washer head nuts, we can see that the corners of these types of bolts are always really rounded out, so a lot of your torque is just right at the bottom. So this type of design may not give you as much of an advantage on one of these fasteners, especially if you're not seated all the way down, or it's really dirty and you're kind of near the top. Then it doesn't grip quite as well. Anyway, that's my opinion of these Icon long handle wrenches. To tell you the truth, they are cheaper than the tool truck ones, but they are still a pretty expensive tool. But at the same time, these are probably the nicest box wrenches Harbor Freight's ever had, and I think that was a good idea for them to have the long handles. Those are kind of what people are into these days. I do like having the extra reach and a bit of extra torque with the long handles, as well as being a good way to build up sets, since this length tends to be the standard length. These are definitely several inches longer. And yes, I have looked at quite a few of them, and they all are pretty straight. It seems that what they've done is, when you forge a long wrench like this, it's going to be curved. So what they've done is spent a bit of the extra money to put the wrenches through a straightening process after they forge them, so that they aren't bowed. So I do appreciate that as well. Anyway, I really appreciate everybody watching and subscribing. And if you haven't subscribed, please do. Until next time, Catus Maximus out.